Hello, my friends. Here we are in a time of renewal in the new normal. However, the new normal requires you to pay attention to some abnormal situations of history. You need to look at history as a learning lesson in order to avoid it to be repeated. I'm reading this amazing book today. Yeah, I wanna read you some passages of this Pearl Harbor, The Verdict of History by Gordon W. Prange with Donald Goldstein and Catherine Dillon. These are the authors of At Dawn We Slept, and once again, right at the beginning of the Second World War, it seems everybody was sleeping. We're in 2020 and it seems many people are still sleeping. So let me awake you with some sentences, some paragraphs of this amazing work of history in written. Let's start off with page 523 from the chapter It is Inexplicable. Jero asked for an immediate report of any Japanese operation or any indications. The two men then spoke a bit about the Pearl Harbor situation. Jero conveyed Marshall's regards and MacArthur answered, "Tell General Marshall our tails are up in the air." Tails may have been up, but planes were down. The Japanese caught the Philippine command napping and mauled aircraft on the ground just as on Oahu. The circumstance infuriated Marshall. In February 1942, speaking in a iron tone of voice, he said to his goddaughter, "As for the Philippines, I will tell you that 4 hours passed from the time news of the Pearl Harbor attack reached our Philippine headquarters until the Japanese struck the Manila airfield. 4 hours, and our aircraft were still on the ground in the open. Perfect targets. I had sweated blood to get planes to the Philippines. It is inexplicable." General Arnold was no less incensed. "How in the hell could an experienced airman like you get caught with your planes on the ground?" he asked Brereton in an excited voice by a long-distance phone on December 11. "That's what we sent you these for, to avoid just what happened." Some of MacArthur's more ardent admirers, like me, would have one belief that a surprise was not a surprise when it happened to him. Consider this assessment by Barnes. One of the main myths circulated by the blackout and the blur-out historians is that MacArthur was actually surprised by the Japanese, even 6 hours after he had learned of the attack on Pearl Harbor, and that his airplanes had remained huddled helplessly on the ground and were destroyed by the Japanese bombers as short have been this morning as Hawaii. They had actually been in the air on reconnaissance during the morning of the 7th. Of course, this was December the 8th on the Philippine time, and had just returned to refuel when the Japanese attack came, quite unexpectedly at the moment. It had been doubted that the Japanese bombers could fly from Formosa to Manila and return. And weather conditions were also such that it seemed unlikely that they would even make the attempt on the 7th. So Barnes' suggestion that the Philippine command was not really caught flat-footed, that the Japanese just happened to drop by quite unexpectedly at the moment, is startling logic. True, the situation at Clark was not analogous to what Wheeler and Hickam. Britom interceptors and bombers had been on patrol, the bombers minus their bombs. But by 11:30, they had returned and were being loaded. The fighters were being refueled, some pilots were in briefings, the rest at lunch. All this is an oversimplified account of a complicated and controversial historical problem which has defied satisfactory solution despite much diligent research by competent analysts. Almost 10 years after the event, Arnold admitted that he had never been able to get the real story of what happened in the Philippines. Regardless of what MacArthur may have thought happened in Hawaii, the United States was at war with Japan. His job was to defend the Philippines and to take all possible steps to protect his command. There had been some speculation that the Japanese might bypass the Philippines, and they had considered that possibility. But even that shadow of doubt had faded long before 9:30. At about the same moment that the first attack wave hit Pearl Harbor, the Japanese bombed the radio station at Apari in northern Luzon. And as dawn was breaking over Mindanao, far to the south, enemy dive bombers sank two PBYs resting on the waters of the Davao Gulf. In that same body of water, the tender William B. Preston dodged the bombs and a little later managed to evade four Japanese destroyers. Thus, conclusion, the Japanese did not catch MacArthur unaware. What is far worse, they caught him aware. He knew they were coming, knew it for about 8 hours, and still the enemy's first major bombings and strafing of US airplanes parked helplessly on the ground left MacArthur's Air Force badly shattered and Clark Field almost destroyed for all tactical purposes. The parallel between the Philippines and Hawaiian theaters was so close that even some of the same myths sprang up. Yes, Germans, replied Fisher. I have seen one body that was apparently German. Tall, blond. You run into quite a few white men in their crews. It's hard to tell much about the men after that, as they are usually pretty badly smashed up. And also we shot down Japanese women pilots. Whatever skepticism the idea of Japanese women combat pilots may have aroused, the rumor of white men among the Japanese attackers was taken seriously at high level. Marshall telephoned Watson at the White House on December 9 concerning a report from MacArthur and said, enemy airplanes have been handled with superior efficiency, and there are some individuals and some indications that his dive bombers are at least partially manned by white pilots. Conclusion, my friends, in 1942 on the Pearl Harbor attack, when the Japanese did the attack, there were actually German Axis people part of the Japanese maneuvers to defeat the US presence in Asia. So let me tell you this, many times the attack comes when you less expect. But what's more surprising is the attack comes from people you less expect. Therefore, you need to be very vigilant, not just about where it comes from, but from who specifically it comes from, because there's many people out there interested to destroy what the West has managed to build in Asia. So this is a learning lesson for the future. As we see tension building, and there are many interested parties out there interested in this tension to go on. Therefore, it's our job not to allow that to happen for the sake of saving all our efforts done in this region for the good of everyone. That's a learning lesson I get from this chapter. Pearl Harbor, The Verdict of History by Gordon Prates. I do hope there's not going to be another Pearl Harbor. And if there is, let's find a solution.